Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of our Open Studio series. My name is Sam, and I teach small group botanical resin jewelry classes at Odd Flower Studio in Oakland, California. In class, we transform flowers like the ones you see here into beautiful personalized botanical earrings, necklaces, and bracelets like the examples you see here. For today's project, I've decided to make something custom for my sister Jessica. Since my sister does not wear earrings right now, we're going to make a necklace for her today. And you can skip to any part of this project you want to in the menu below. I hope you enjoy this session and find it useful, and possibly feel inspired to start making your own projects too. Before I begin working, I know it's important to have a full understanding of what my sister wants, so I hop on a call with her. We chat for a bit, I show her some examples to understand what shape she likes the best. We then take a look at the different options of flowers she likes too. We specifically focus on flowers that have been dried but not pressed because Jessica really likes that 3D look. By the end of the call, she ultimately ends up telling me,
I was thinking for the bottom layer, just chrysanthemums, and if it could fit, multiple chrysanthemums.
okay, yeah, I think we can definitely do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that would look great, I think, too. And then
maybe for the top, I was thinking we could do like branches. I don't know if you have any
ooh,
branches.
yeah, I love that idea. I think branches would look very nice with that. Let me get to work on my end and I'll show you a few examples. And then once you decide what you want to go with, I will make it. And you'll get a nice surprise in the mail, which is going to be a lot of fun. After talking to Jess, I got to work drawing up a few choices based on the design direction she gave me. I created 3 very distinct options for her to choose from. I told her she could mix and match elements from the 3 choices if she's torn between any. So what you see here is option 1, and we're calling this the classic and timeless pendant. It is the most literal interpretation of her request. Where it particularly shines is in its simplicity, with each layer staying true to a single but spectacular natural element that it features. The top layer focuses on the purple branches, which we've arranged in a tasteful curve. The bottom layer fits 3 beautiful white mums in an elegant oval. We're referring to option 2 as the earthy and balanced pendant, and what it focuses on is these delicate green, tiny little pines on all of these little branches. Given the contrast between the white and brown petals and the feathery little pines in the branches, I thought they looked great when balanced together in the same pendant. To add even more balance, I made the pines the focal point of the circle pendant, peppering them in with a dash of baby's breaths here and there. Our final option here is what we're referring to as a soft structure pendant, and it has many similarities to option 1, but features just 2 chrysanthemums in the oval pendant and a sprinkling of baby's breath strategically placed at the ends of the purple branches. The changes are meant to give a more embellished and feminine vibe to the necklace. Okay, so to recap, here are the 3 distinct design directions we customized for Jessica based on her choices from our call. And after giving her some time to review all 3, she ultimately chose option 1, the classic and timeless design. Given how closely the sketch fit the description she gave us, it comes to no surprise that she chose it based on the simplicity and abundance of chrysanthemums. Before we get started on our pendant, let's talk about what we need to complete the rest of the project. For the project planning itself, we need dried flowers, scissors, a container to hold the selected flowers, tweezers, and molds. We'll also need the rest of the items on this list, but we'll introduce those later on. My goal today is to use 3 white chrysanthemums and a few of these purple branches that I have to create this double layered pendant over here. So I'm going to go grab a few of those. We'll guide you through the process of how we gathered all of our flowers for this project. So we first focused on our chrysanthemums by gathering them with a pair of scissors. I snipped them right below where the stem meets the flower. I gathered all 3 of them and collected them in this container here. Here's what they look like in more detail. The top view of this flower will be the focal point of the pendant's oval tier. I then focused on trimming the purple branches and gathered enough to trim and shape them into the curved pattern we've designed for the top portion of the double-tiered pendant. One thing that's helpful to keep in mind as we're trimming these plants is that many of them are delicate and require gentle handling. You may even want to use a pair of tweezers to handle them. Before I begin working with the resin, I typically like to place everything in what I refer to as a practice mold, which is an extra copy of the final mold we use for resin casting, but it allows us to visualize our design before we actually begin the work. Since all of our molds are made out of silicone rubber, it makes it a little difficult to clean. So what I like to do is clean my final casting mold ahead of time, keep it off to the side, and leave it undisturbed until I'm ready to start casting resin in it, just because it's a pain to clean twice in a row. And now that we've gathered all of the plants needed for our project, we're ready to show you how to transform them into beautiful resin pendants. So for this next part, we'll need the following materials: the dried flowers we picked out, the container and molds that are holding them, scissors, tweezers, silicone resin molds, per the instructions that we specified earlier with, using a practice mold and also the final mold. However you want to do that at home, it's up to you. Silicone mats, silicone mixing cups and sticks, and any bowls that might be helpful. Nitrile or latex gloves, painter's paper, blue painter's tape, epoxy resin, heat guns or culinary torches if you prefer using that, protective goggles, storage bin or drawer to keep your project overnight, pruning shears, white vinegar, and paper towel. The last two items you see on this list, the white vinegar and the paper towel, you may not even need those, but they're helpful for cleanup, so you just want to make sure that you keep them around just in case some kind of accident happens. If you've made it this far in the video, welcome to my balcony! Before we begin mixing the resin, we want to make sure that our casting molds are clean, prepared, and ready for the process. We're using just the oval and small circle molds for this project, and we're going to start pouring and mixing our resin very soon. So this particular brand of resin includes a 2-part mixture, and the 2 parts include the resin plus the hardener. And we need to mix these 2 parts in the same measuring cup, and we need to measure them in a 1-to-1 ratio. But ultimately, make sure that you're reading your manufacturer's instructions. It's important that you make sure that you're following all of their safety rules. So throughout the entire process, I'm protecting my hands with gloves. If you're doing any of this work at home, you should also wear gloves because you want to make sure that your hands are protected. This resin is really difficult to get off of your hands, so we want to try to keep them as covered as possible, basically. So we'll need about 10 to 20 milliliters of resin for this specific casting, and we'll be stirring this for about 4 minutes off camera. So the resin will take a few minutes to stir, but in the meantime I thought it'd be useful to discuss a question I often get in class, which is, how do I know when my resin is mixed thoroughly enough? Well, why don't we discuss that for a moment? The way in which you know it's mixed really well is it'll become clear again. You can kind of see it's really bubbly. It's kind of chilly today. That's part of the reason. We're gonna have to go extra hard with the heat gun, basically. But despite the bubbles, the mixture itself looks pretty clear, and that's how you know it's done. No streaks, just clarity. That's all you want to see. Since it's windy today, I've decided to bring a large container to cover my botanicals in the practice mold with. So I'm using a round cake pan mold that is made out of silicone. It's nice and sturdy and heavy and will keep my flowers at bay. We're going to first begin working with our chrysanthemums though. After pouring some of our resin into the small silicone mixing dish that's just sitting on the table, I can use it to just drench the chrysanthemum. You may notice that some unwanted air bubbles start to appear on the flower, but you can easily remove them with a heat gun. Just make sure that the heat gun is a couple inches above the mold to prevent any damage or burning. You may want to coat it in resin a few more times, but in the meantime we want to cover the face of our mold with a layer of clear resin. About 1/8 of an inch deep is what I usually recommend, and this is because it makes it easy to access any air bubbles with our heat gun. I'd recommend using your heat gun between each layer that you pour, paying special attention to the corners and sides of your pendant. Once we feel happy with the consistency of our first layer of resin, we can add the mum we've already coated. Just try to make sure there are no air bubbles in between the layers, and we'll repeat the coating process for the next 2 flowers as well. And then when you're done coating them, you can add them to the pendant. And when you're adding your final layers of resin, just try to coat the back evenly. Moving on to the top circular pendant, we first coat the face of the mold with a base layer of resin and blast away any air bubbles. I then directly place the branches in. I place them all about where I'd want them to finally end up, knowing they'll likely move around a bit and I can easily put them back into place later when I add more layers. I may want to see how my pendant is looking from the other side, which is technically the front. My partner is going to help me get a pair of protective goggles on just to make sure that my eyes are protected. When I lift the mold to look below, I can observe with confidence, knowing that I will not have any really bad situations on my hands with any resin falling on my face, especially my eye. So a note to kids and parents with kids, or just about anyone who's afraid they'll accidentally touch their eyes. You can keep these goggles on for extra safety. You can in fact wear them the entire time you're casting your items in resin. They'll give you extra protection. As I'm finalizing my top pendant and adding more layers of resin, I am continuing to move the branches into place. The epoxy resin gives you a good 45 minutes or so of time where the liquid form of it is super flexible right after stirring. This makes the resin a very forgiving medium. So if you place something and you don't like the placement of it, you could always move it around, or if you don't like it at all in general, you can just remove it. But we want to keep adding layers of the resin until the resin is about level with the top of the mold. Any excess resin should be moved into the next mold over. Hey guys, so we're ready to store this overnight. I've been doing my best to keep this flat without tilting it, and I'm going to keep it in here. This file cabinet is actually the perfect size for this. I can fit about 3 of these molds in here pretty safely. So our project is a little bit different this time around, and we have to do a second casting in the back. It's been about 15 hours, and that's given us enough time to make sure that the resin is hardened for a second casting. Looking at the 2 sets of molds here and observing the pendants where the flowers stick out a lot, maybe you've noticed or been thinking that it'll be really uncomfortable to wear, and you're probably right about that. We must trim it, just like we've done with the rectangular pendant on the left over here. These are all additional castings from the leftover resin this project gave us. We may do something with these another day, and I personally like using a pair of pruning shears for this step because it cuts through the plants more easily. Bear in mind, this step in general requires a bit of awkward cutting and muscling your way through the bottoms of the flowers, but you want to keep cutting until it is substantially flattened. Once we're happy with where it's at, we mix up some more resin off camera to seal the backs in. So we've waited an additional 24 hours for the second casting to fully cure, and we're ready to turn the pieces into a finished necklace. The final materials needed to finish this part of the project are wood carving or X-Acto knives, sandpaper, respirator or dust mask, microfiber towel, a cup of water, turtle wax polishing compound, healing ointment or coconut oil, pin vise hand drill, machine oil, clamp, notebook or wood block, chain in your choice of metal, jump rings and clasps in your choice of metal, chain cutter, a flat nose plier, and a pair of chain nose pliers. The first thing I need to do is sand and polish my pieces. I begin by demolding my pendants from their molds. Since they're made from silicone rubber, I have quite an easy time with this. After quickly giving the pieces a look, I can already tell that the oval needs some serious trimming and sanding, but the circle needs just a little bit of sanding. I demold the rest of my pieces. I start trimming the excess resin on my first piece with a pair of scissors. I'm cutting away at an angle and trying to follow the curve of the oval, being careful not to trim them too close. To cover away more resin in closer detail, I use an X-Acto knife. I'm carving away thin layers off the edge of the pendant. I keep carving away at the edges until they begin to look a little more cleaned up and ready for sanding. For sanding, I use 4 different grits for most jobs, and those are 320 to remove material, 400 to smooth, $600 to buff, and $1,500 to polish. I have a bucket of water and a dust mask. Wet sanding prevents dust from becoming airborne, and the mask helps prevent me from breathing it in. I'm using each grit of sandpaper in graduating order from coarse to smooth, starting with 320, checking on the piece periodically as the shape is forming. I use 320 grit if I feel a piece really needs it, and that's it. I will skip that grit for the circle piece, but begin at 400 grit sandpaper. I repeat the process for both pieces until I'm through 1500 grit sandpaper. Then I move on to polishing with car polish. I dab a bit on a wet microfiber cloth and let the mixture coat the sides and faces of the pieces, paying particular attention to the edges where we just sanded. I keep polishing with my cloth until the piece is smooth and shiny. Using a healing ointment such as Aquifer or coconut oil are both great for adding extra shine. I coat my piece with a generous layer and rub away with a microfiber cloth until it is clean, clear, and shiny. And the next thing I need to do is drill a hole into the top circle with our hand drill. Before drilling, we oil the hand drill with a machine oil. We mark the exact place we want to drill by digging into the surface with the end of our drill a bit. After we've clearly marked our spot, we clamp the end of the circle pendant into place. For drilling, I'm using a notebook, but if you have a woodblock at home, even better. And what that notebook is doing is it's allowing me to protect my table below. Now that everything is polished and ready for assembly, we open up the jump ring to attach the two layers together into a single pendant. When opening a jump ring, always twist. Never pull the two ends apart. If you pull them apart, they will never be a perfect circle again. I'm using a 10mm jump ring to attach the two. You may need to adjust or clean up the holes on the pendants to get them to fit around the ring. We close the jump ring by twisting the two ends together as closely as possible again. You may need to wiggle the ends a bit together a few times to get it right. We added an 8mm jump ring at the top and proceeded to make a chain. After cutting our chain to size, we added a 5mm jump ring at one end and a 3mm jump ring and a lobster clasp on the other. And here is our final result. My sister wanted to finish her necklace with brass hardware, so that's what we've attached to the pendants, and I hope you liked this video. Please leave me a comment below if you have any questions or just want to say hi, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a great night or day or whatever time it is, and hope you guys stay safe and healthy. All right, bye. If you're interested in collaborating on a project together, signing up for a virtual class, or possibly designing a special gift for a friend, reach out in the comments below or email us.